There is something that keeps people stuck without completely stopping them. It doesn't block everything. It doesn't make failure obvious. Instead, it does something more subtle. It slows things down. Opportunities take longer than expected. Plans don't move when they should. Simple progress feels delayed again and again. And the most frustrating part is you can't always explain why. Because from the outside, everything looks normal. You're trying, you're working, you're doing what you're supposed to do. But internally, something feels off, like you're moving, but not at the speed you should be. I've seen this pattern many times. And when I was on the other side, delay was never random. It was one of the most effective ways to keep people in place, without them realizing they were being held back. Because delay creates a cycle. You wait, you adjust, you try again, but you don't recognize that the pattern itself is repeating. So instead of breaking it, you adapt to it. Now here's where it becomes important. This pattern doesn't just exist externally. It is reinforced internally through thoughts, reactions, and repeated responses. Because what you agree with continues. What you tolerate stabilizes. And what you repeat becomes normal. That's why many people pray, speak, and try to move forward, but still experience the same delays. Not because they are doing nothing, but because they are unknowingly supporting the pattern they want to break. So today, I'm going to show you how to destroy that pattern completely. Not through long processes, not through confusion, but through clear, intentional steps that remove delay at its root. Because once the pattern is broken internally, it cannot continue externally the same way. And when that happens, movement becomes natural again. So don't listen to this casually, because if delay has been a consistent part of your life, then what you're about to hear is exactly what you need to change it. Before you can destroy delay, you have to recognize where it actually starts. Because most people are looking in the wrong place. They look at their circumstances. They look at external situations. They blame timing, people, or conditions. But when I was on the other side, we didn't start there. We looked at patterns, because delay is rarely about one event. It's about repetition, the same kind of hesitation showing up again and again, the same type of interruption appearing at key moments, the same cycle of starting, stopping, and restarting. And once you see that pattern, you realize something important. This is not random, it's consistent. Now here's the deeper part. Patterns don't continue on their own. They continue because they are being reinforced, sometimes through words, sometimes through thoughts, sometimes through reactions you don't even notice. For example, you plan to do something important and suddenly you feel hesitation. Not strong, not overwhelming, just enough to slow you down. So you wait. You tell yourself, I'll do it later. And in that moment, delay is reinforced, or something doesn't move the way you expected. And instead of staying steady, you start thinking, why is this always happening? Nothing is working. And again, the pattern is reinforced. Now, this is important because you may not be creating the pattern intentionally, but you are continuing it through your response. And that's where your power is. Because what you continue, you can also interrupt. Now, here's how you identify it clearly. Look at your recent experiences. Where have things slowed down repeatedly? Where have you hesitated when you should have moved? Where have you delayed your own actions without a clear reason? That's the pattern, not the event, the repetition behind it. Now, once you see it, you stop treating each situation as separate. You stop reacting to each delay like it's new. Instead, you recognize this is the same pattern trying to continue. And that awareness changes everything because you're no longer reacting blindly, you're responding intentionally. Now, this is the first step to destroying delay, not fighting it, not forcing results, but seeing it clearly. Because once you can see a pattern, you can break it. And in the next chapter, I'm going to show you the first step to interrupting it, because recognition alone is not enough. You have to stop it at the moment it tries to repeat. Now that you can see the pattern, this is where everything begins to change. Because recognition without interruption does nothing. You can understand delay, you can identify it clearly, but if you still respond the same way when it appears, the pattern continues. When I was on the other side, this was the moment we depended on most. Not when someone noticed something, but when they failed to interrupt it immediately, because delay doesn't need strength to continue. It just needs time. Even a small moment of hesitation, even a short delay in response, is enough for the pattern to re-establish itself. So this is what you must understand clearly. You don't interrupt delay later. You interrupt it the moment it appears. Right at the beginning. Right when you feel it. That slight hesitation, that unnecessary pause, that thought that says, wait, do it later. That's the moment. Not 5 minutes later. Not after you've analyzed it. Immediately. Now here's how you do it. You don't argue with it. You don't overthink it. You cut it off. You say clearly and internally, no, this does not continue. Simple, direct, intentional, because delay feeds on hesitation, but it weakens when it's interrupted instantly. Now here's where most people make a mistake. They feel hesitation and they engage with it. They think about it. They question it. They try to understand why they feel that way. And in doing that, they give it time. And time is what allows it to grow. But when you respond immediately, there's no space for it to build. Now, this is important. You don't need emotion. You don't need intensity. You just need clarity and speed. Because the faster you interrupt, the weaker the pattern becomes. Now, after you interrupt it, you must take one more step. You move forward, even in a small way, because interruption without action leaves the door open. So if you were about to do something, you do it. If you were hesitating, you move anyway, not perfectly, but deliberately, because movement reinforces the interruption. Now, when this becomes your response, something shifts quickly. You stop delaying small actions. You stop pausing unnecessarily. You begin to move more naturally. And that's how delay starts to lose its hold. Not through one big moment, but through consistent interruption in small moments. And in the next chapter, I'm going to show you what comes after interruption, because stopping delay is one step. But if you don't replace it with the right pattern, it will try to return again. Now, this is where most people lose progress. because they interrupt delay, but they don't replace it. And when something is removed, but nothing takes its place, the same pattern finds a way to return. When I was on the other side, this was one of the most predictable outcomes. Someone would break a cycle for a moment. They would say, no. They would interrupt hesitation. They would stop the delay in that instant. But then they would pause. They would hesitate again. They would wait for clarity. They would go back into uncertainty. And just like that, the pattern restarted. Not because it was strong, but because nothing replaced it. So understand this clearly. Interruption creates space. Replacement stabilizes change. Without replacement, there is no stability. So what do you replace delay with? Direction and movement. Immediately after you interrupt delay, you establish where you are going, not perfectly, but clearly enough to move. You decide, this is what I'm doing next. And then you act. Now, this is important. You don't wait to feel ready. You don't wait for perfect confidence. You don't wait for complete clarity. Because waiting is the same pattern in a different form. Instead, you move with what is already clear, even if it's small, even if it's simple, because movement reinforces your new position. Now, here's where most people struggle. They think they need certainty before they act. But certainty comes after movement, not before it. So if you wait for it, you delay yourself again. That's why replacement must be immediate. Interrupt delay, then move, no gap in between. Now, when this becomes your pattern, something shifts quickly. You stop overthinking small decisions. You stop delaying simple actions. You build momentum naturally because your default response is no longer hesitation. It's movement, and movement creates progress. Now, let me say this clearly. You don't need to take big steps. Small, consistent actions are enough because consistency is what builds a new pattern. And once that pattern is established, delay has no space to return. In the next chapter, I'm going to show you how to maintain this, because starting movement is one thing, but keeping it steady is what unlocks real results. And if you don't maintain it, you'll find yourself starting over again. Now, this is where the real test begins, because starting is not the problem for most people. They interrupt delay, they take action, they feel progress for a moment, but then they slow down again, not suddenly, not all at once, but gradually. And that's how the pattern returns. When I was on the other side, this was the most reliable phase. We didn't need to stop someone from moving forward completely. We just needed them to become inconsistent, because inconsistency rebuilds delay automatically. You move forward one day, then hesitate the next. You take action in one moment, then overthink in another. And slowly, momentum weakens. Now understand this clearly. Momentum is not maintained by effort. It is maintained by consistency. Small, steady actions repeated without interruption. That's what keeps movement alive. But the moment you become inconsistent, delay begins to rebuild. Now, here's how it happens in real life. You start strong. You make decisions quickly. You act without hesitation. You feel in control. But then something small happens, a distraction, a moment of doubt, a slight delay, and instead of correcting it immediately, you let it pass. You tell yourself, it's okay, I'll get back on track later. But that small delay becomes a new starting point, and if you repeat that response, it grows. Now you're not moving with the same speed, you're not as focused, you're not as consistent, and just like that, you're back in the same cycle. So, how do you maintain momentum? You don't wait for big problems to appear. You correct small shifts immediately. The moment you notice hesitation, you interrupt it. The moment you see yourself slowing down, you adjust. The moment your focus drifts, you bring it back. Because small corrections prevent big delays. Now, here's the key: you stay aware, not stressed. You don't pressure yourself. You simply pay attention to your responses. Because your response is what maintains the pattern. Now, when this becomes your habit, momentum stabilizes. You don't rely on motivation. You don't depend on perfect conditions. You move consistently, regardless of small distractions or temporary setbacks. And that consistency is what removes delay completely, not by force, but by replacing it with something stronger. Now, in the final chapter, I'm going to show you how to lock this in long term, so this doesn't become something you try for a few days, but something that permanently changes how you operate. And once that happens, delay will no longer feel like a cycle. It will feel like something you've outgrown. Now, this is the final step, and this is where everything becomes permanent. Because up to this point, you've learned how to recognize delay, interrupt it, replace it, and maintain movement. But if you don't lock this in, there is always a chance the old pattern can return quietly, not all at once, but slowly through small moments of inattention. When I was on the other side, this is what we waited for. Not a complete breakdown, just a gradual return to old responses. A little hesitation here, a little inconsistency there, a small delay that goes uncorrected. And over time, the pattern rebuilds itself. So this final step is about making sure that doesn't happen. And it comes down to one thing: your default response. Because whatever your default response is, that's what will repeat automatically. If your default is hesitation, delay will always find a way back. If your default is overthinking, movement will always slow down. But if your default becomes immediate interruption and action, delay has no place to return. So, how do you lock this in? You stop treating this like something you try, and you start treating it like how you operate. Every time hesitation appears, you interrupt it. Every time delay tries to start, you move immediately. Every time your focus shifts, you bring it back. Not occasionally, not when you feel like it, but as a normal response. Now, here's the shift. At first, you have to remind yourself, you have to stay aware, you have to catch yourself in real time. But over time, it becomes automatic. You don't think about it anymore. You don't debate with hesitation. You don't sit in delay. You respond instantly. And once that happens, the pattern is broken at its root. Now, delay is not something you fight. It's something that never gets the chance to grow because it's stopped immediately every time. Now, let me be clear. You don't need to be perfect. There will be moments where you miss it. There will be times where you react late. That's normal. What matters is that you correct it quickly, because quick correction prevents repetition. And repetition is what creates cycles. So don't focus on being perfect, focus on being consistent, because consistency turns this into your default. And once this becomes your default, you don't just break delay, you outgrow it completely. And when that happens, movement is no longer something you struggle for, it becomes how you live.